That
Yeah.
works?
Okay, I'll do that.
Great. I hope you can see the presentation screen.
Yes.
Okay, so welcome everyone. This is just a brief overview of what could be done with data, and the idea is really to see how can we use data that's already out there in efficient ways to contribute to public debates and connect academia to what's going on in the world outside. What I'll be doing is to focus on one in particular, one data set in particular, Afrobarometer, which is a research network that I've been working with and for almost a decade now. But this is obviously also replicable with other data sets, surveys, and otherwise. All right. So who is this really for? Who could do this? And what I'm presenting here is really not reinventing the wheel, but more encouraging everyone to think about these things and maybe give them the nudge to say it is worth doing and it has several payoffs. So some of you might have seen the pictures from the LA protests and the police presence and now military presence as well, or more recently as well, the meeting between President Trump and the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, where we saw in many ways issues raised about migration or asylum seeking, as well as racism and other aspects. And so to each of these debates, we might have visceral reactions as academics, and maybe don't exactly know how we could engage with it. Some of these ways, I think, is by bringing background information to it in quite an efficient way. And so we can contribute to the current debate using public opinion survey data. We can also explore new ideas. So, for example, if we thought about, I don't know, citizens' perceptions about the police in the US, right? This might be a great current event topic to contribute something to it and just use data to explore this in a bit. Or, and this is an example that I'll show in a second just now, you might have conversations with colleagues about something and something that irked you in public debate about an issue that's near and dear to you, and you just write something quick and put it out there. We treated it almost like a bit of group therapy. And you can also use different outlets. Most of us will be familiar with The Conversation or BBC, but you can also write these things and then, for example, put them together, upload them to Notebook LM, create a short podcast out of it, put it on your website. And you can do that with your articles, of course, but you can also do that with the short piece of writing that you might do, put a graph next to it, and then you can attract a whole new audience that you otherwise might not be able to engage with in a kind of efficient way. Okay, so why secondary survey data? So the advantages of it are it's free. Most of these public opinion survey projects, the cross-national ones, are free. They cover literally the globe. They often have very broad thematic and geographic coverage. So anything from democracy to perceptions about, as I mentioned, the police, corruption, the environment, but also in several instances, infrastructure data. So I'll show an example where I use the public opinion survey data to actually show where electricity is available in countries across Africa and how this has changed over time, as well as cell phone ownership and how that can help inform debates about e-learning, for example. And most of the time, because they ask the questions over time, you can talk about broader trends, which I think is often useful to put current affairs into a broader context. Now, as I mentioned, I'll be using Afrobarometer as an example, but there are plenty of other great survey projects out there. As part of the Global Barometers Group, we have Afrobarometer, Arab Barometer, Asia Barometer, LAPOP, the ESS and Eurobarometer, as well as, I think, Central European Central Asian Barometer as well. They ask similar questions, not always the same ones, but it also allows us to make connections. So for example, if we want to talk about migration, we could compare regional powerhouses like Brazil, South Africa, and India using these barometers. Okay. So Afrobarometer has started in 2000 or 1999 and has grown over time. We're now covering 40 countries or over 40 countries, and we have time series data. And on the website, there's actually a really simple online analysis tool, which already can give you some nice trend data that you might want to look at for a topic that you're interested in. And these are all publicly nationally representative surveys that are taking place every 2 years, more or less. Okay, so taking you back for a second, this is a piece that I wrote in reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic. I know for most of us it's a blur, 2 years that we were kind of remember or don't remember, but one thing that came up, as especially parents might remember, schools were closed or closing and wasn't sure whether they would reopen again, how they would reopen, and how do students engage throughout this period. One suggestion that was often thrown around as well, we can just do e-learning or remote learning and everything will be fine. But that's obviously contingent on the idea that we have students that have laptops, that have a room where they can work or some sort of the computer that they can use, reliable electricity, cell network if need be, or internet connection, and that they're familiar in using these tools. And that's not necessarily the case all over the world. When we look at the African context here, so these are on the slide, you'll see all the countries that had required school closures, which is unsurprisingly was the vast majority of countries in June 2020. And so the question is, how many of these countries could actually feasibly do any sort of e-learning, right, or remote learning? And it bugged me at the time that so many people were saying, well, it's just distributing laptops and everything is fine. And so I went to the data and had a look. And the first thing that you can see is just looking at ownership of cell phones, for example, it changes not only drastically over time in countries like Uganda, for example, from 2014 to 2019, we see that it goes from 65 to 88%, but also that there's huge variation even just prior to the pandemic between Botswana and Guinea, where almost everyone has cell phones, to Malawi on the bottom end. So that's the first thing. But then, of course, you need not just smartphone, you need internet access, you need reliable electricity. So I used all of that data that was already available over time and fairly recently from Afrobarometer, created an index out of it, and then I was able to show to what extent this actually varies across the continent. And what we can see here is this index, dark or green colors, meaning the population is ready to do this type of e-learning, and red means it's more difficult or impossible to an extent. We can see the huge variations from Mauritius, Cabo Verde, Morocco, and places like Gabon, where we maybe would have not picked that at the top of the list, down to countries like Madagascar, Malawi, Niger, the huge variation across this. And
Matthias, officially you've got 2 more minutes, but because okay. I think we've got flexibility, so I don't want to rush you.
Okay. Thanks.
Use the time you want.
Thanks. So I wrote up a report and was able to respond to this, to current affairs in a way. It was also a very productive way of procrastinating. At the time I was writing my PhD, so there was a nice way of getting away from this for a while. And also, after this was published, I actually was approached by a couple of professors in public health at UCLA who wanted to collaborate on something around mobile health. So those were payoffs that I didn't anticipate would happen based on a very quick and comparatively descriptive analysis. And it has also given new ideas for collaborations with colleagues around e-commerce and the digital economy, and to what extent is Africa ready for this? So repackaging some of this for new ideas, actually. Another idea where we can use survey data is something around elections. So we know election cycles are fairly predictable. We roughly know when elections happen. But it's often the question is, okay, what are the biggest issues and who cares most about them? And most surveys have questions around what are the most important issues, right? And we can track them over time. We can see what's consistent. We can also see how this breaks down by gender or age or region, for example, and contribute to debates around, in particular, the youth. Often people say, yeah, the youth is especially unhappy, but in most cases, that's actually not true. Who would have thought that people middle-aged and older also care about employment and crime and so on? And one reoccurring theme is, for example, the voter turnout. Every election, people are surprised that young people vote less than older people. And here, very simple line charts that we can generate for South Africa or across the continent, we can show that this is actually a consistent occurrence that we maybe shouldn't be so worried about, or we could be worried about it, but not surprised by it at least. And so these are quick interventions that you can make. And here I've done this together with a couple of colleagues, also responding to elections, but also we talked about the turnout issue for so many times, for so long, and I said, actually, let's just write up something quick and put that out. And it's actually also a great way of getting graduate students involved, because these are fairly simple contributions, often 1,000 words or less, with data that's available and that they would have trained on in any sort of methods course. So that was a great way of getting them involved as well. And the more you practice this, of course, the more you write, the better it gets, the more support you get from editors as well, which really has helped in writing for a very different audience, for example. Okay, some lessons from using secondary data that's, and again, I can't emphasize this enough, that's freely available. Often in the case of Afrobarometer, it takes millions of dollars to collect the data every 2 years, and you have that available at your fingertips for free. And it, in many ways, I think actually some sort of responsibility to use this. Whether it's public opinion survey data, or in other instances, it might be other sorts of data that's collected regularly. I think it's really worth using that. It's a productive way of procrastinating or dealing with something that you might have cut out of a paper and you just chuck it into public engagement. It frequently sparks new collaborations. We've seen this in the Afrobarometer network, connecting people across the continent, but also across continents and across disciplines. I've worked with people in public health and education. We're busy exploring something in architecture as well. So it's really quite diverse. And it helps you to explore new formats. As I mentioned, you can create a podcast out of it. You can approach radio stations, or in most cases, once you publish these things, you get approached by radio stations and TV stations. That might also help just visibility for your own research, but even the university as well. We all have the ref probably pop up in every conversation that we have in the department. And lastly, I think it's mostly about framing, I think, is a really important aspect of it. So just by putting stuff in like e-learning or digital divide and something like that, it's surprising how much people search for this type of stuff. And if you're the first one to write about it with some data, you actually get recognition pretty quickly. So the e-learning thing that I talked about earlier is till date still the second highest thing that I ever wrote on Google Scholar. So it's got some surprising payoff. And once you put this all together, you do it for a little while, you can collect this on your website, and you have a nice portfolio actually of public-facing engagement that that you can keep track of. All right, that's it.